In April 2025, the name Donald Trump once again became the center of international political attention. After reclaiming power in the contentious 2024 election, he quickly revived one of the boldest foreign policy initiatives from his previous term, nuclear negotiations with North Korea. Trump's decision to prioritize North Korea as his first foreign policy move surprised observers, but wasn't entirely unexpected when reflecting on his past administration. From his first days back in the White House, official statements from the Trump administration made it clear they were serious about re-establishing dialogue with Pyongyang. At a press conference on April 18, Trump stated, "Chairman Kim and I have exchanged messages, and I believe the time is right to resume the journey we left unfinished in 2019. The world, once again, watches every move from these two nations considered pivotal players in the global geopolitical game. Will this time be different from the previous two failed attempts? Or is it just another political cycle with hidden agendas behind the scenes?" Amid a volatile global backdrop, from the unresolved Russia-Ukraine conflict to escalating U.S.-China tensions, the renewal of U.S.-North Korea dialogue signals more than just a nuclear issue. It touches on global status, influence in the Asia-Pacific region, and a reshaping of America's leadership role under Trump's second term. Meanwhile, North Korea has continued missile tests and announced remarkable advancements in nuclear technology, showing they have not been idle. For the U.S., the objective isn't just halting the nuclear program, but also scoring a symbolic victory to restore domestic and international confidence. The return of this old game may be a risky gamble or a shrewd calculation. Either way, it is certain to be a focal point of international media and strategic analysis in the coming months. To understand why the current talks are drawing such close attention, we must revisit the two earlier attempts between Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un. The two summits, Singapore in 2018 and Hanoi in 2019, were initially hailed as breakthrough moments in U.S.-North Korea relations. Yet ultimately, neither yielded any substantive results and instead contributed to a decline in mutual trust. The 2018 Singapore summit marked the first time in history that a sitting U.S. president met with a North Korean leader. With iconic images of the two leaders shaking hands in front of U.S. and North Korean flags, the world appeared to witness a historic moment. In the joint statement released after the summit, North Korea pledged to work toward complete denuclearization of the Korean peninsula, while the U.S. promised security guarantees to Pyongyang. However, the statement lacked specificity. There was no timeline, no verification details, and crucially, no enforcement mechanism. Following the summit, global media was divided. Some considered it a hopeful start, while others criticized Trump for prematurely claiming victory without securing any binding commitments. In practice, North Korea continued developing its nuclear infrastructure, and the U.S. delayed any meaningful sanctions relief. This skepticism materialized during the Hanoi summit in February 2019. Not only did the two sides fail to reach an agreement, but the summit ended abruptly, earlier than scheduled. According to the U.S., the main stumbling block was North Korea's demand for substantial sanctions relief in exchange for dismantling parts of the Yongbyon nuclear facility, an offer Washington found insufficient. Pyongyang, on the other hand, believed it had made significant concessions and was disappointed by the lack of reciprocity. The Hanoi summit marked a negative turning point, effectively freezing formal communication between the two nations for the remainder of Trump's first term. While the two leaders occasionally exchanged letters, which Trump described as beautiful, there were no substantive negotiations. North Korea resumed short-range missile tests, while the U.S. continued joint military drills with South Korea, reigniting regional tensions. The failure of both summits raises a critical question: can this renewed effort succeed? On one hand, past experience might help both sides better understand each other and avoid previous mistakes. On the other hand, there's a real risk that both Trump and Kim are again using diplomacy as a political tool rather than genuinely aiming for denuclearization. Given the current landscape, where both leaders seek strategic advantages and mutual trust remains fragile, the path to a meaningful agreement will be fraught with challenges. Still, the mere fact that both parties are willing to resume dialogue is a cautiously positive signal, at least from a diplomatic standpoint. To truly grasp why Donald Trump is reigniting nuclear negotiations with North Korea during his second term, one must ask, why now? Why is an issue that had been shelved for years suddenly a top priority again? The answer begins with domestic American politics. After narrowly winning the 2024 election, Trump returned to office not with overwhelming support, but amidst deep polarization within society and even within the Republican Party. His approval ratings dropped significantly within the first few months of his second term, as his tariff policies, immigration stances, and budget proposals faced harsh criticism. In this context, Trump desperately needs a major foreign policy win to reassert his political authority, and North Korea offers a strategic opportunity. Another major factor is media optics. Trump understands the power of visuals, symbolism, and drama in politics. A renewed historic handshake with Kim Jong-un, or even just an image of both leaders sitting across the table, can generate massive headlines and public attention. He used this tactic effectively in his first term and likely believes it still works. Beyond optics, reopening negotiations with North Korea aligns with a longer-term U.S. strategy to counter China's growing influence in Asia. If the U.S. can gradually pull North Korea away from Beijing's orbit, through economic incentives or security assurances, it would deal a strategic blow to China's regional dominance. Amid escalating U.S.-China rivalry, every move in Northeast Asia carries strategic weight. There's also the personal angle. Trump has always viewed the North Korea issue as a piece of unfinished business from his presidency. In multiple interviews, he has expressed regret over the failure of the Hanoi summit and claimed that, "We were very close to a big deal." For someone who thrives on proving himself, returning to the negotiation table might be a chance to finish what he started, and cement his legacy. Realistically, Trump doesn't have many other avenues for foreign policy breakthroughs. Relations with Europe are tepid, conflicts in the Middle East remain unresolved, and the Ukraine-Russia file is too complex to tackle quickly. North Korea, though unpredictable, is a familiar chessboard, one Trump knows and has played before. Furthermore, Trump's advisory circle in his second term has changed significantly. Newer, more pragmatic figures have joined his team, people more willing to negotiate if it means concrete wins for the U.S. Unburdened by the failures of the past. They may approach the issue with fresh perspectives. This shift gives Trump reason to believe this time could be different. That said, not everyone in Washington supports this approach. Some Republican lawmakers argue that negotiating with a dictatorship like North Korea amounts to rewarding bad behavior. Meanwhile, Democrats warn that Trump could be manipulated again, just like in 2018 to 2019. Still, Trump appears resolute in his decision. In a New York Times op-ed, a former national security advisor noted, Trump doesn't just want negotiations. He wants to make history. And for him, if that takes drama, controversy, even risk, it's all the better. Finally, it's also possible that Kim Jong-un himself initiated the opportunity. Soft diplomatic signals from Pyongyang in recent months, like scaling back military exercises or discreet diplomatic overtures, suggest that the door to dialogue was not entirely closed. And if both sides have political incentives, a renewed summit becomes far more plausible. In short, Trump's return to North Korea talks is not merely a foreign policy move. It is a calculated fusion of political survival, personal ambition, strategic maneuvering, and media theatrics. It may be a bold gamble, but one that, if successful, could pay off tremendously. The real question now is, will Kim Jong-un play along once more? In any diplomatic negotiation, the focus tends to center on the United States' actions. But in this case, a complete understanding requires a deeper look into North Korea's motives and strategies. Kim Jong-un is not simply reacting, he is proactively playing the game, guided by shrewd and deliberate calculations. First, it's important to recognize that North Korea never truly intended to abandon its nuclear program. That program is the cornerstone of Pyongyang's survival and bargaining power. While Western media often portrays denuclearization as the ultimate goal, for Kim Jong-un, nuclear weapons are a tool to achieve something greater, regime survival and international legitimacy. Talks are not meant to end the nuclear program, they are a way to extract maximum benefit while maintaining deterrence capabilities. Currently, North Korea faces more internal pressure than ever. The COVID-19 pandemic further crippled an already fragile economy. International sanctions remain firmly in place, while traditional ally China has reduced direct aid and appears to be shifting strategic focus towards South Korea. In this context, reopening negotiations with the U.S. becomes a practical move for North Korea, reconnecting diplomatic channels, easing external pressure, and potentially securing economic concessions. Historically, Pyongyang has employed a provocation then negotiation strategy, escalate tensions, then de-escalate just enough to push counterparts toward compromise. It's highly possible they will reuse this playbook in 2025. Another motivator for Kim is personal image. After a long absence from the international stage, his global stature has waned. Appearing at another high-profile summit with a U.S. president, especially Trump, could help restore his image as a global statesman and strengthen his legitimacy at home. It's also worth noting that North Korea's new generation of leadership, including Kim's sister, Kim Yo-jong, and several younger military figures, seems more pragmatic and less ideologically rigid than their predecessors. This could signal a greater willingness to negotiate, if it benefits the regime's long-term stability. Full denuclearization may remain off the table, but partial freezes or controlled inspections could be seen as acceptable trade-offs for humanitarian aid, infrastructure investment, or partial sanctions relief. Yet North Korea is far from a weak actor. Pyongyang understands that Washington's return to the negotiation table reflects a political need. This gives Kim leverage to raise the stakes, not just economically, but politically as well. Demands could include an end to U.S. South Korea joint military drills or the establishment of permanent diplomatic missions. However, many experts caution that North Korea could be using negotiations to buy time while continuing to quietly advance its nuclear capabilities. History shows that even while signing agreements, Pyongyang has frequently violated terms and concealed weapons development. Western analysts remain skeptical, if not outright doubtful, of Kim's true intentions. A key question emerges: is North Korea genuinely prepared to compromise this time, or merely replaying familiar tactics? The answer may lie in their response to specific proposals from the U.S. If Pyongyang proactively offers transparency measures, such as allowing international inspectors or partially freezing missile development, it could signal a meaningful shift. In short, North Korea has not returned to talks out of weakness. It is doing so with clear objectives: protect the regime, break out of isolation, and capitalize on a shifting global order. Kim Jong-un sees a rare opportunity: a U.S. president who needs a foreign policy win, and a global stage in flux. He is poised to turn it to his maximum advantage. In any negotiation involving North Korea, the United States is never engaging in a two-player game. The move to restart nuclear talks in 2025 is not merely a bilateral decision, it resonates across a broader geopolitical chessboard involving China, Russia, South Korea, Japan, and various international institutions. Let's start with China, an actor that cannot be ignored when it comes to North Korea. As Pyongyang's largest trading partner and longtime ally, Beijing functions both as a protector and a quiet regulator. China does not want a nuclear-armed North Korea to grow too strong, but it also fears regime collapse, which could lead to a flood of refugees and potential U.S. military presence near its border. Every step the U.S. takes toward Pyongyang is closely monitored in Beijing. From a strategic standpoint, China views the Korean peninsula as a vital buffer zone in its regional power contest with the U.S. If Washington can successfully bring North Korea into its diplomatic orbit, or even just reduce its dependence on Beijing, it would be a serious blow to China's regional influence. That's why China often advocates for multilateral dialogue formats, hoping to stay central in the process rather than be sidelined by direct U.S. North Korea engagement. Russia, though often overlooked in this context, is not a passive observer. Isolated by the West over the Ukraine war, Moscow has been seeking to expand its influence wherever possible, including Northeast Asia. In recent years, ties between Moscow and Pyongyang have warmed through high-level visits and renewed economic cooperation. While Russia lacks major direct stakes on the peninsula, it sees North Korea as a geopolitical bargaining chip, especially in negotiations that stretch across Europe and Asia. South Korea is perhaps the most directly affected party in these talks. The current South Korean government, elected on promises of reconciliation and dialogue, has maintained inter-Korean communication channels, albeit with limited authority if U.S. North Korea talks stall. Still, Seoul remains an indispensable partner that Washington must consult closely, since any U.S. concessions will impact South Korea's national security and political landscape. Having been repeatedly disappointed in the past, the South Korean public now watches these talks with guarded skepticism. Japan, too, has its eyes on the evolving situation. Regularly targeted by North Korean missile tests, Tokyo is wary of any soft deal that might undermine regional defense stability. The Japanese government consistently urges Washington to address broader concerns, including abducted Japanese citizens and long-range missile programs, in any agreement. At the same time, Japan has ramped up its defense spending and tightened military ties with the U.S. amid rising regional tensions. International institutions like the United Nations and various watchdog agencies also play a crucial background role. They emphasize transparency, monitoring, and verification mechanisms in any deal. If the US and North Korea do reach a new agreement, these bodies would be instrumental in formalizing and enforcing its terms, unlike the vague, unenforceable statements of the past. Beyond governments, global corporations and financial markets are also keeping a close eye on the outcome. A successful agreement could open doors for investment, infrastructure development, and resource access in one of the world's most underdeveloped but potentially strategic regions. In summary, U.S. North Korea negotiations do not happen in a vacuum. Every step forward, or backward, triggers ripple effects across world capitals. From Beijing to Moscow, from Seoul to Tokyo, every player is calculating its next move. The success or failure of these talks will depend not just on Trump and Kim, but on how well the broader web of interests is managed. After analyzing all the key factors, from Washington and Pyongyang to the broader geopolitical players, the big question now is, what happens next? The upcoming negotiations between President Donald Trump and Chairman Kim Jong-un could play out in one of several major ways, each with far-reaching implications for the region and the world. Scenario 1: a meaningful agreement. This is the most optimistic scenario, but also the least likely, according to many analysts. In this case, both parties make substantial concessions. The US gradually lifts sanctions in exchange for North Korea freezing or even dismantling parts of its nuclear program under international supervision. The deal would also include provisions for economic opening, humanitarian assistance, and basic infrastructure redevelopment in North Korea. A bilateral agreement might even be signed, potentially under the observation of the United Nations or third-party nations like South Korea and China. The outcome would mark a significant diplomatic breakthrough. Trump could claim a historic foreign policy win, boosting his domestic and international stature. Kim Jong-un would gain global legitimacy, and the North Korean economy might start to recover, reducing reliance on China. Northeast Asia could enter a new era of relative stability, drawing in cross-border investment and cooperation. However, such a deal requires unprecedented levels of trust and transparency, neither of which has ever been sustained between the two nations. Both sides would need to accept political risks. Trump would face criticism from conservative factions, while Kim would need to persuade his elite circle that disarmament is in the regime's best interest. Scenario 2: a symbolic, non-binding agreement. This scenario is more probable. The two sides might agree on a joint statement, pledging to continue talks, paired with some symbolic actions, such as shutting down an outdated nuclear site or establishing a liaison office. However, critical issues like full sanctions relief, international inspections, and explicit denuclearization would be postponed indefinitely. From a public relations standpoint, this could still be spun as a win. Trump would leverage the optics for political capital, and Kim could portray the engagement as a recognition of North Korea's sovereignty and strength. However, the shelf life of such an agreement would be short. With no enforcement mechanisms or legal binding, it would be vulnerable to rapid collapse. The region may see temporary calm, but underlying tensions would remain unresolved and prone to escalation. Scenario 3: breakdown and escalation. This is the most dangerous scenario, and entirely plausible. If both parties fail to find common ground, especially over sanctions and nuclear verification, the summit could end abruptly, much like in 2019. This would likely be followed by renewed missile tests from North Korea and a hardline response from the US, potentially involving redeployment of THAAD systems or increased military exercises with South Korea. A diplomatic collapse could spark a security crisis. All hopes for dialogue would vanish for years. Meanwhile, opportunistic moves from China or Russia could further complicate US influence in the region. Wild card factors, the unpredictable unknowns. Outside these three core scenarios, wild card events could drastically shift the landscape. Domestic political upheaval in the US or North Korea, sudden leadership changes, interference by China, or even a nuclear accident, all could derail any progress overnight. History has shown that the Korean peninsula is prone to sudden, dramatic turns. The world holds its breath. Whatever happens, the stakes are immense. These talks are not just about nuclear weapons, they're about the balance of power in East Asia and the credibility of diplomacy itself. From Tokyo to Washington, from Seoul to Moscow, leaders are watching every move Trump and Kim make. The future of the Korean peninsula remains uncertain, but one thing is clear: the world is watching. If you found this analysis insightful, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video with others who care about global affairs. Hit the bell icon so you never miss an update on this evolving story. Speaking head in silhouette, drop your thoughts in the comments. Do you think this time will be different?